Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My knee just cracked. Oh no. So I was looking over some of the comments that you guys posted on the video where I asked what kind of content you guys would be interested in seeing on this channel. And I noticed a few comments that said that they would be interested in me sharing sort of hopes and dreams and passions. And so I decided that for today's video, I was going to post a interview that I did on a podcast a couple of years ago where I talk about hopes and dreams and passions and what I struggle with as an actor and how I got my start and all that kind of stuff. But there is something special about this interview. It's not just any podcast. It's a podcast that I did with my sister. My sister, you may or may not know this, is also an actor. She did this amazing podcast called Conversations with Actors, where she interviewed a ton of working actors about everything, kind of about their lives. Some of my favorites that she had on that podcast was an interview with William Sadler from The Shawshank Redemption and Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, as well as Robin Weigart from Deadwood, and she asked me to appear on it. And I warn you, there's definitely an informal vibe where, you know, we're clearly talking about professional things, but I'm talking about those things with my sibling, so apologies now for the occasional giggling. But as I said, we do hit upon things that you guys did ask about, including how I got my start and what my college experience was like, what my favorite medium is, so I thought it would be worth sharing. Also, I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about a particular story that I share in the interview where something happened that I got a lot of pressure to share on social media, and it was something that I struggled with. And obviously that line, share, don't share, is something that I'm still sorting out for myself. So without further ado, enjoy the interview and feel free to share in the comments below parts that you thought were interesting or that resonated with you, things that you thought could bring up a larger conversation, just whatever suits your fancy. So enjoy, guys.
The rich human interest story of Hollywood is filled with happiness and despair, joy and tragedy, a crazy quilt of madness, sanity, laughter and tears, the desperate struggle to reach the top and the battle to remain there.
My name is Vivian Kerr, and this is Conversations with Actors. So I'm not going to pretend I don't know you.
I mean, we could try, but
that would be weird.
Fooling nobody.
So how did you get interested in acting, or when did you figure out that you wanted to be an actor?
You know, the honest answer is I don't really know. I know that it's always been there in the back of my head, and I remember that you know, our parents took us to a ton of theater growing up, and that probably solidified it more than anything. But I remember specifically we went to go see this production of Peter Pan, and I think I was like maybe 6 or something. And I remember at the very end of it, when they came out to do the curtain call, I realized for the first time that the guy who played Mr. Darling was also Captain Hook, because he came out in Mr. Darling's outfit, but he had Captain Hook's hat and wig on. And so he came out wearing sort of both, and I was like, you know, and then he took off the hat and went to see that it was Mr. Darling underneath, and my little 6-year-old mind was like, because like he spoke differently, Captain Hook was taller, and and like all these things, and that's like, you know, always how this show works, but I didn't realize that, and I was just blown away by that, you know, that I was right there in front of him, and I was completely fooled, you know. And so I think kind of moments like that is when you start kind of realizing like the you know, the power of performance and things like that. And, you know, I think that's when the appeal of storytelling as an actor started to really kick in.
So we're going to flash forward a little bit.
Okay.
So I know you went to UC Irvine for drama. Mm-hmm. So what was your experience like there? Like, you know, how were you as an actor when you first started going there versus like 4 years later when you left? What do you feel like you learned there?
I think the biggest thing that I learned at UCI which was actually more helpful in moving to Los Angeles than I realized, was I remember having somebody ask me before when I was looking at colleges and deciding, do you want to be, a big fish in a little pond or a little fish in a big pond? So you're like, what are you looking for if you're deciding between private schools or public schools or the size of the program? And I had been offered a scholarship at a private school, and I remember going to look at that, and nice school, nice facility, but it was definitely like, it seemed like it might be a bit of a big fish in a little pond scenario, which was really appealing when you haven't done anything, and you're like really kind of trying to learn. You're like, oh, this seems pretty cool and safe. But I had learned when I was touring UCI that they ran their grad program and undergrad concurrently. And so basically as an 18-year-old, you would be auditioning for parts opposite grad students. And it ended up being the best thing. It made the first couple years there fairly miserable because, I didn't get cast in anything. And I had all the worst of the worst audition stories and so much choking on monologues and, just going into these, big black rooms with, the people with tables and the spotlight and the whole thing. And just my knees just shaking, and then, watching like a 23-year-old grad student come out just before me who's like whistling on their way out, and I'm just like, oh, go to hell. Like with that.
When did the knee shaking go away? Or does it just sort of like the knob is turned down on it?
I don't know if it ever really goes away, but it made it so at least I could figure out a way to get through a performance, I felt like UCI helped me kind of find a place a bit for my fear, but it didn't eliminate it. And there's also, figuring out what that meant. Because I remember talking to an instructor of mine because I had done some scene in a scene study class, and I could see my knee was shaking the whole time, and I could see that everyone else in the class could see my knee was shaking this whole time, and I was so embarrassed by it. And I remember afterwards talking to him about it, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. You have to kind of get over these ideas that you have of all actors are X. They perform like this. They and they all, and unless that, then,
Is there any rituals you do, before a performance in a play or before, the first day on set or before an audition that makes you less nervous?
Breathing, yeah. Especially for auditions. Even sometimes for class, if there's a scene that I have to do in acting class, and I'm like, oh, brother, and I can feel the nerves kind of coming up. Really as simple as 3 deep breaths where I, or even sometimes I do it before a take where I'll just do kind of quietly to not embarrass myself, but kind of a long exhale.
Do you work in a certain way, following a certain technique that you learned at UC Irvine, or has that evolved over time? Is there a certain approach that you have for everything you do, or do you change the way that you approach a role based on the role?
I think when I first moved out here, I think I definitely had kind of a one-way approach to how I did things. What I also kind of liked about UCI is they sort of made us try every method. You would for a certain series of classes, we focused on kind of each sort of the most popular methods, and you had to work on a bunch of material just using that. Even if you hated it, even if you whatever, that's just what you had to do. And the great thing about it is that you could kind of, pick and choose what you liked out of it, what you didn't like out of it, what you... I think when I first moved out here, I think I was a bit married to a couple of those approaches. And I feel like the longer I do this, the more I like kind of mixing it up. And I think it also, for me, largely depends on the director, and it largely depends a bit on what my co-stars are doing. I think when it comes to prep stuff, I write a lot, and so I really like keeping journals for characters and stuff like that. And so in my own kind of prep when I'm at home and thinking about my character or doing research about her, what her deal is I tend to just write a lot, and I really like that, and it's helpful too because then I can take the journal on set, and if I'm having a moment to myself or I feel like I'm getting too distracted by the crew and I'm starting to step away a bit from the headspace I'm supposed to be, I can go back to this journal and I can always have it. And
that's so interesting. Do you write as yourself, or do you write a journal as the character?
I write the journal as the character, yeah. And it's interesting too because sometimes I find that the more I write about, and maybe again it's just because I'm inclined to writing because I like it so much, it gets to be a bit of a kind of a ghostwriting thing where I'll start writing stuff and all of a sudden you're like, oh really? Oh, is this the deal? Oh, apparently this is the deal now. Just stuff kind of comes out that I'd never even really thought about, but you know, this is our favorite song, and this is how we met in the first fight, you know, and, you know, we just had our first fight, and this is what it was about. You know, it's just like all this sort of nonsense kind of comes out later, and you're like, oh, that's a little scary, but you know, it's enormously helpful, you know, and I think also too, I tend to do it a lot for films because, you know, you don't have the luxury of rehearsal that often, you know, so usually it's like I'll get to spend a little bit of one-on-one time, you know, with my co-star or, you know, hopefully the director. But really, like, you don't really get to live in the world of the story until you're shooting it, you know? And so often when I first started working on films, I could tell when I would watch the movie later what was the first 2 days worth of shooting in the movie, no matter where it was in the movie, because I could tell, like, I hadn't found it yet. And then I could also see scenes where I'm like, oh, that was towards the end of the shoot because there it is. But, like, you know, when you shoot the movie out of order and it's inconsistent, you know, so I just realized, okay, if I wanted to have sort of a more consistent performance where, like, I'm in it as deep as I can get it from beginning to end, the prep just has to be massive. Like, I can't rely really on the director for that or my co-stars for it or, you know, any of that, because if, you know, I'm having issue with them or we're just moving too fast or, you know, I don't know the way in which they like to communicate or whatever, like, it'll take a couple of days to find it, and you can't afford that in a couple of days, because, like, in a movie, a couple of days can be a fair amount of material depending on how fast you're filming, and you don't want to compromise the performance just because, like, you know, you don't have your act together. So
do you have which part do you enjoy the most? Do you enjoy prepping alone by yourself more, or do you enjoy the part where you bring that to a set?
I think I like the part where I bring it to a set, because I think this was always, you know, part of the sort of like the, you know, the sort of nervous leg syndrome was always about if I had a partner, somebody whose, like, face I could look into, a lot of the nerves went away pretty fast, you know, because you had somebody else you can get engaged in. You know, with auditions or sort of monologues, it was harder for me because there was no one's face to look into, you know, or if it was sort of, you know, the auditors who were totally, yeah, it was the wall or it was the auditors who were staring, you know, and I would just get consumed by the atmosphere that I was in, you know, and it was hard to, like, nope, that's not a thing, Marion, think about this, think about, you know, whereas when you come to set, you know, and if the other actor is, you know, sort of done their due diligence, you are allowed to be consumed by the set. Like, you ought to be. That's the best part. And for me, it's easy if, you know, like, because that's the thing I naturally want to do. That's the thing I have to eschew if I'm doing a monologue in a big scary room, but it's the thing I can totally embrace on a film set when everyone's ducks are lined up, you know? And so I feel like that makes, you know, the stuff I've done at home, that's like the subconscious, and the conscious stuff is like everything that, you know, that's around you now.
What do you think what has been the best thing about your career as an actor, and what do you think has been the hardest about it?
I think the hardest thing is probably just the inconsistency, you know, the sort of, like, it makes, I think, you know, you could wake up one morning and it could be like the best day of your life, or it could be like the worst day of your life. You know, you feel like you have these auditions that if you get them, your life would go this way. And if you don't, well, it'll just be like the day before, and, you know, and all this kind of thing. And I think it makes it hard to plan things. I think the highs and lows, the highs are higher and the lows are lower, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I think the best part about it is you know, if you get to, especially, I guess for me, you know, I work a lot in independent film, and I feel like the best part about that is that I get to learn a lot about people and about, you know, not just people's occupations, but the way people live their lives, like what's important to people, what's not. I feel like it can make you like a better human being in a lot of ways, because you have to step inside a lot of people's shoes and step inside and see the world from a lot of different perspectives. And what has very often been the case for me is that I have read something and not liked a character, or sometimes even my character, and then by the end of the shoot, I like her a lot, you know, and I like her a lot because of the reasons that I didn't really like her originally, you know.
So all actors go through periods of employment, periods of non-employment.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? Well, I guess first of all, what is the longest you feel like you've gone without being employed, and then what did you do to keep yourself invested in this career that doesn't seem invested in you.
Yeah.
Which is brutal.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to be honest, if I hadn't done so much work in terms of like collaborating with other filmmakers or, you know, creating work for myself, that would be a really brutal question, because if I picture kind of the number of projects that I've been involved in, either as the writer or as, you know, or as the director or as whatever, but I've also acted in, if you sort of took all those away from me, yeah, it'd be pretty grim. So I think what tends to happen is what I try and do now is I feel like I sort of almost always have something in the offing. Like I always try and have like one or two things that, like, you know, are kind of in various stages of sort of development with collaborators or, you know, whatever. And I feel like when it gets slow, shockingly, suddenly those projects come up to Marion's forefront, and Marion's like, no, let's really do this thing. Let's, you know.
Do you think you would have, I know you've written and directed, would you have done those things? Do you feel like if your acting career, like you were, you know, working in like television full time or something, or do you feel like even if you were doing that, you still would find time for these side projects?
I think so. I just don't think I would have done them maybe as quickly. You know, I think for me, you know, I only started doing them, frankly, when I first moved to LA, because, you know, I had done 4 years of college, and, you know, it was like all the, you know, it was like scene studies and plays and blah, blah, and all the stuff. And like I was starting to do student films with like the film program there. And then it was like I moved to LA, and it was like everything just like ground to a halt. And it felt crazy. It felt like, this isn't right. This isn't, but it was, because we didn't know anything. Like I didn't know how to find an agent or how television, I didn't know anything, you know? So I just started doing them just because it was like, well, you can't just wait. You can't, it's crazy. Like you have to like do something. Like it's just, you know, and that's just never really stopped. And I've actually noticed it too with even filmmakers who like someone named like Josh Radnor, who like, you know, was on this How I Met Your Mother for however many seasons, and then all of a sudden was like writing and directing his own features, like on every hiatus or whatever. And so it made me think like, yeah, I just don't think if you have that in you, I don't think that ever really goes away, even if you're working. I think it like gets pushed back a little bit because you have to like really find time for it. But I think if you really have like those kind of stories in you, and you really want to do something where you have more kind of control of the pie, I think that's just in you, and I think you would do it regardless, and I kind of feel like I would do it regardless.
If you could only work in one, I feel like I know the answer to this. One medium, film, television, or theater, or the web.
Who says the web? Who's like, listen, film or television? I know. I would only do the web if I had any choice.
Don't knock the web. It is worldwide. Do you have a favorite medium?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I am very partial to film.
And I think that's so interesting, because everyone is so unique in what they are drawn to. What is it specifically about film acting that you love?
I like spending a lot of time with the story, and I frankly, I love how long film shoots are. I like that, you know, you have a bit more time to work on scenes and work on material. I really like kind of telling a story from beginning to end, and I like collaborating with a lot of different people on set to tell that story, because I feel like the collaboration is not just with like the director and the actors, like the obvious people. Like I really like being really in touch with like the DP and what he's shooting, what framing, and what he's thinking, and, you know, helping him out with the shot, or you know, with hair and makeup people, or with wardrobe people, and like, oh, this is my idea. What do you? I like that it's kind of like a nonstop, you know, or somebody has an idea for, you know, like the AC is like, well, what if we over here? And you're like, oh yeah, maybe we, you know. I just like that it's kind of a nonstop collaboration train from beginning to end, from people who see the story from a lot of different places other than how you see the story.
You work so closely with the director. What do you do when you don't get on with the director, you don't see eye to eye? Or has that not happened to you?
I was actually just telling the story to a friend of mine the other day about how I did this movie once, and I only did like maybe 3 or 4 days on it. But it was with a director who wouldn't come out of Video Village, like ever, and he would only relay direction to a PA who would like come over to the actors and then tell us. And then we would be like, but what? But so he wants me to da-ba-da-ba-da? And people would be like, oh yeah, okay. Like, go away. Tell the director, come back. Da-da-da. Okay, so what he wants. Da-da-da. And so finally, like at the end of like, in the beginning, I was like, sort of on the first day, I was like, okay, maybe he's like sick or something, you know, and doesn't want, like I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. And then like, just before we went to lunch on the second day, it was something crazy. It was something like a very nuanced thing. And he was making this poor guy go back and forth like for how many times. And I just had it. And so I kind of stepped over like halfway towards Video Village. And I was like, you know, I can't remember what the guy's name is now, but he was just like, hey, Paul or whatever. So do you want da-da-da-da? And, you know, and yeah, the guy absolutely looked like I was like a tiger that had come out of my cage. Like he was just looking at me like he was terrified.
It's so funny. Like he like really wanted there to be a divide between
definitely
Video Village and like what the actors are doing.
Right. And so he looked at me like I was, and I could kind of feel that the vibe on the set was like, you know, and I was like,
you deigned to approach the throne.
But yet nobody had told me. But nobody had told me. P.S. With Paul, you can't ever go up to. Like it was just like everyone just accepted it as normal, and I was like, this is crazy. So I did whatever the thing is, and we broke for lunch. And at lunchtime, I went over to his office and was just like, hey, so I don't understand. Like, I don't understand. Like, I feel like I really want to talk to you. And I feel like all this is a lot easier if we just kind of go back and forth and da-da-da-da. And the sort of back and forth of this guy, like, it just seems, I don't understand, you know? And so I felt like we had to, and, he sort of explained, what, his reasons for it and whatever. And, we kind of figured it out. But the conversation had to be had. Because, like, otherwise you're so limited in like what you can do, and you're so limited in all these kind of ways that I feel like unless you have these, you have to talk about the elephant in the room in these situations, because like otherwise, you know what I mean? I feel like I'm flying blind, and I also feel like performance-wise, it's like it's the thing about the camera is that it's kind of hard to hide these things. I feel like I will watch sometimes people's films and I can sense uncomfortability, or I can sense an actor being unsure. And then like I'll be at film festivals, and later those people from that show will go down to do their Q&A, and there's a weird deal amongst them as they're doing the Q&A, and you can see it when you watch the performance. And then when they come down to do the Q&A, it's still obvious, And so I feel like in those situations, like I just don't want to waste anyone's time, It was like I don't want to waste people's time, like coming to watch this movie and like. They have to watch a sort of half-assed performance because Marion didn't have the balls to go talk to her director about what the hell's going on. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't want to waste anyone's time. Mine, theirs, the audience, anybody. So, I feel like you have to kind of nip those things in the bud.
Do you have, like, a favorite role that you've done?
Like, in anything?
Yeah, like, or is there something that you've done that you're... Or I guess maybe a different way would be like, is there something you've done that you're like the most proud of, or is there something, and then I guess on the flip side, is there something that
please burn it
where no, but you feel like, well, I was going to be more generous. I was going to say either redo it or just take on that role again.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll look at both.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things I would like to redo, of course. But again, one of the reasons why I'm grateful for college is I feel like, man, if I'd moved out here, and started kind of getting into film and stuff when I was like 18, 19 years old, there'd be probably so much of that I'd be like...
You felt like you were bad in your college performances?
No, I don't think necessarily bad, but it's just... It's funny because we were talking earlier about characters, about this sort of like radical empathy about characters that you're like, I don't know how about that. And I would, the two things that kind of spring to my mind are two characters who, when I first read the scripts, I didn't really like the character. And they ended up being the things that I enjoyed doing the most. And one was, I did a production of David Mamet's Oleana. And the first time I read it, I thought Carol was like the worst, like just the worst. I was like, man, just like this super self-obsessed, insecure, like get over yourself, sweetheart, kind of, thing where I'm just like, take it down, like 9 notches, like shrill and shrieking and, whatever. And all these things. And like, I really felt, sort of bad for the professor, which is probably not what I ought to think, but I did. And so, but I knew at the time when I had gotten it that like, at that point, I had done a lot of plays where I was, always the ingenue and always sort of like dreamy-eyed and the boy and the whatever. And so this was a role in a play that was not that at all. And so I was like, yeah, all right, we're doing this, And then by the time we came to opening night, the times where she does kind of like lose her mind a bit towards the end of that show was my favorite, because I never got to do that kind of stuff, and I felt like I never got to, you know, kind of have that sit with me and live with that, and that was really fun. And the other example is an indie feature I did called Heart of Now, and same thing. It was like the first time the director had given me who was also the writer, gave me the script, and I read it. I liked basically every single character except mine, because and I fully told him this, because I was like, I don't get it, I don't understand her, I don't know why she's doing this, I don't know why she's doing that. But I still did all my work and still did whatever. And then about at some point, you started keeping a journal as her and like kind of doing all this stuff. And then at some point during the shoot, it was a feature. I was so into her, like so into it. I started having, the first time this has ever really happened to me, I started having dreams in character, which I've never had before, where I was like dreaming about the other actors who were in the shoot, but they weren't the actors, they were themselves, and I was her. And yeah, it's just like a bunch of nonsense. And I remember there was one defining moment towards the end of the film where the director had sort of decided, like, I think this is a choice. She comes down, there's a choice that she has to make at the end of the movie. He was like, I think it's really going to be this. And I remember in pre-pro, I was like, it's definitely going to be this. Like, that's crazy. I don't think so. Nobody did that. And then we were out actually getting ready to shoot it. And I was like, he's totally right. Like, it's this, because that's what she would do. That is the choice that she would make, that would, whatever. And I wasn't like mad about being wrong. I wasn't angry or whatever. Again, it's just like, and that was the first time that I really thought, wow, like actors and our own personalities and prejudices can really get in the way sometimes. Like we can really get in the way of like characters and choices. And that's when I felt like I realized how much I was judging characters a lot, you know?
I always think like about that Hunter S. Thompson quote, like, buy the ticket, take the ride. And I kind of feel like when you get a role, it's like you've been given your ticket, like you've gotten the admission, you know what I mean? So now you got to go on the Ferris wheel, and like, you're right, you're not in charge of the Ferris wheel, like you're not the operator, you're just on it. Yeah.
And it's hard too, though, because I think that's, you know, I think for the most part, everyone else can a lot of other occupations allow you to sort of have your worldview and prejudice and whatever and still do your job, you know? But I think it's good to recognize when it gets in the way. And that was a really good hallmark, because it's really gone like 180 on this, where I was like, wow, I am super in the way.
Is there a kind of role or kind of perspective that you want to take on that you haven't taken on yet?
No, I mean, I think that there are like roles that, like, you know, I kind of grew up seeing a lot of theater, and my degree was primarily towards theater. So in reading a lot of plays, like there are certain roles and certain plays to do it. I really liked Lark. And I feel, you know, obviously like the Joan of Arc story is incredible. And so but I feel like that was, and I know, you know, there's sort of St. Joan and all these other, but I remember when I read the Lark and would read some of her monologues, and it made me cry, like just reading it, because her belief was so strong and so powerful that I was like, and you know, there's certain, like my favorite Shakespeare play is Much Ado About Nothing, and so I've always loved to play Beatrice, and Katharine Hepburn, the Philadelphia Story, a play that kind of helped bring Katharine Hepburn out of the box office poison realm. It was a great play by Philip Barry, and Tracy Lord's a great character, and so I always thought that'd be really fun to do. So I think about it more in terms of plays, like characters in plays, than I do like, I want to be a serial killer. I want to be a, you know, like I don't really care about that. I think it's just that I don't think it's really like an archetype or characters like I'd like to play or whatever. I think it's just that, you know, like anybody, you're just like, you're looking for a great piece of material, and you're looking for, you know, that kind of thing.
I'm looking for weak material that I can make better.
I know. Or some people really want to play serial killers, like I do. Like that's just the thing.
Have you played a serial killer?
I have never played a serial killer.
I've played a serial killer.
I know you have played a serial killer. I was like very jealous. That's the thing, is I feel like when you did your crime show, you were the killer. When I did my crime show, 100% the victim, and I was like, damn it, like,
you know, actors have to do their work, have to have a lack of vanity to do their work, but then there's so much like emphasis placed on how you look, how
selfies,
selfies, all that, you know, promoting,
sure,
you know, and that is so much about. I kind of feel like, you know, there's such a vanity aspect to that, but then actors have to not be vain when they're working. Like, how do you? What personally has been your relationship with that two sides of it?
I think, yes, you have to, like we talked about, get out of your own way and, take your kind of prejudices with you to limit the character. But yet I also think that, everyone has their sort of like, it's not even like a morality. It's just more like, this is what I can live with and this is what I can't live with. And I feel like and maybe this is vanity, I don't know, but I feel like there are kind of certain things that might be asked of me for the sake of my craft that I couldn't live with. And so I say no to. And I think part of that might have a bit to do with vanity. And I'm kind of okay with that, I think I am. And so I feel like I don't really necessarily believe in this kind of like anything goes kind of thing. And I know that there are people who definitely do. And I think it does mean that I'm limited in some ways as far as how far I will go for like a performance or how far I would go. And I think I'm also kind of okay with that. And I think that in a weird way the social media thing kind of plays into it, because I definitely know that I could be playing that game way better than I do if I would be willing to do a certain number of things that, for the sake of privacy, because privacy is very important to me, I'm not,
Well, what things?
Like, I think that, actually it's, you and I kind of talked very briefly about this. That actor, Bill Paxton, recently passed away. And when he did, I had a couple of people who had, messaged me like, you should tell your story about, when you met him at this film festival and when he came up to you and he saw these, very kind things to you about your performance. And he had, it was just, I had this kind of lovely conversation with him at a film festival. He was just very encouraging and just really sweet when he didn't have to be, whatever. And I had a lot of people that messaged me that I should post that like in some sort of social media way. And there was like this, part of me that's when I first kind of when I heard about it, I was like, oh yeah, I thought I kind of ought to. But then there was this other part of me where it just felt instinctually really gross. It just felt not right. It felt like I would, somehow be taking advantage or somehow whatever. And then that outweighed any possible, benefit that somebody could have from hearing the story. And also I felt like there had been a cajillion things already about this is how great Bill is. And, and James Cameron's going to speak to it a hell of a lot better than Marion Kerr is. And so I just felt like if I did do it, it would just, and I feel this way a lot of times because when celebrities die, a lot of people go to Facebook to talk about their personal relationship with that celebrity. And this is not to slur anyone who does that, but when I think about myself doing it, it makes me very uncomfortable. And yet I know that in a lot of ways, sort of doing that or sort of talking about personal things or whatever is a much more savvy thing to do, because I think it engages people a lot more. It makes people more interested in you and your process and your whatever. And that's kind of the tipping point of that I am constantly trying to figure out, because I feel like I definitely have actor friends who are like, look at me. And so like every time they're sad, every time they're happy, every movie they see, every whatever, it's just like post. And they have there's no part of them that's like, oh, maybe, no, like they're just like my feelings out there. And I struggle with that a lot, because I feel like I think that part of it is that I believe that actors should, retain a bit of their mystery, because I feel like it makes you, if you are such a personality, even in your sort of small little bubble of Facebook and Twitter, it makes people harder to jump into stories that you're in, because you're such an open book that they know Marion's deal, back to front, left to right. But I think the other part of it is just as a personality, I just really enjoy my privacy a lot. I like that, my friends, my loved one know my deal, and the rest of the world can know what my favorite joke is or can know what I think about auditioning or whatever. But but I don't necessarily want them to know what I think about Bill Paxton's death. Yeah.
Have you ever been offered a role that had nudity that you turned down?
Oh, for sure. Definitely. Yeah.
And
I had a
representation.
Pardon?
How was that conversation with your representation?
Well, I've had those conversations with because I have gone to a lot of film festivals doing independent film, and so sometimes like a filmmaker will see something that I've done, and then we'll later sort of kind of become friends. And then they'll kind of offer me something, and sometimes it'll have nudity in it, and then I'll have that conversation directly with them. I've only really had that conversation once with a guy who was my manager at the time, who isn't any longer, and there was like a role on a TV show that had nudity, and he wanted me to go, and the audition said, but don't come unless you are comfortable with this. And so I was like, well, I don't want to go then, because I don't want to waste their time, because I'm not going to be naked on your show. So and in this particular instance, like he just, and he was sort of trying to give me examples of, Kate Winslet and all these people who are fine taking their kid off and whatever, you're just like, I'm 100% not going to like have this conversation with you right now where I'm like justifying keeping my clothes on. Like that is inappropriate and crazy. And, like it just is, and I didn't think he meant it to be like lecherous or whatever, but, I think he 100% wanted me to get the job, like, and again, it was like the kind of thing where, he was just like, well, all right then. And I was, sort of like the social media thing or anything else. I was like, yeah, I'm going to live with it. I'm fully going to accept that. Like, like you're not going to hear me later, like cry about it and be like, oh, I should have. No, like I fully accept, like I am turning down this really good opportunity because I will not be naked in your show. Like that's just.
And then last question, what advice would you give like, an 18 or 19-year-old or like 18 or 19-year-old Marion?
I know, go to college.
Go to college.
Go to college.
Who wants to be an actor. And so
I don't know. That's the thing. It's like, difficult. It is really difficult. I definitely have heard that thing where people say like, look, if you could do anything else, go do that. And I don't know if I agree with that, but, I guess the only thing I've heard myself say many times to, if anyone for whatever reason is asking my advice, is I'm, just really committed to the idea. And I think that other people should be committed to the idea of, well, that like, if you're in this to do this, like, be aware that like the idea of you putting in 10 years does not make you bat an eye. Or 15 years or whatever. So if your success is tied to a certain time frame, I think that's trouble. I don't think it's trouble if you use it to sort of fuel your own ambition, if you use it as a marker to push you or whatever. But I feel like people I know who've come out here and been like, I'm giving it 5 years, as if that's the only amount of time in which they could endure such things. And I just think maybe if you only think you have 5 years of stamina in you for this business, probably you should tap out. Because even if you quote unquote hit it after the 5 years, there's still the ups and downs, like the lulls, the whatever, are still going to be there. So let's say you hit it after 5 years, whatever it is, and then like your show gets canceled, and then you're, back pounding the pavement again. And so you're miserable and you're confused and you're, I just think that I just don't think time can really factor into it. I think if you really want to be an actor, and this is what I want to spend my life doing, this is what I want to spend my life doing. And you can change your mind. Like people change their minds or people evolve and like, oh, what was important to me was 18 is not important to me at 28. And that's awesome. Like that, I have no problem with that. But the problem that I think that when people are like, yeah, I'm going to give it a couple years and see what happens and then I'm out. I think you're already out then. So for me, I think I would just ask them the question, if you're asking a 19-year-old, so how do you feel about spending the next 10 years doing this? And like, and after 10 years, yeah, you have some credits and you've done some things, but like, you're still not famous. Like nobody knows you, like, and if you could just see that just sort of terrifies them, then I don't know, then maybe, but it's hard too. Cause it's like, if someone had asked me that when I was 18, 19, I have no idea what I would have said, cause you're not really thinking about things that way necessarily. And maybe you ought not to, but I think if you think that you want to be an actor, it's like it really is a thing that you're going to do for the rest of your life, So this idea of, I remember seeing Kevin Spacey do The Actors Studio, and somebody was talking to him about making it, and he was like, I don't know what it is, but you need to stop thinking about that. Like there is no it. There is no it where you hit and you're like, now feet up on the ottoman and done. Career achieved. He's like, that doesn't exist. You are always chasing. You are always, it's never good enough. It's never, the bar just keeps, the problem is once you start having some measure of success, the bar just keeps going higher and higher. And what is absolutely true is that the more I work and the more quote unquote success that I have, I don't feel any better. I don't feel any at all. He's right. Like, you just keep looking up. You're not really looking back. And you're like, well then, so none of it is good enough. And you're still chasing and you're still fighting. And I think that never goes away. So I think as long as you can live with that, then maybe the 18 or 19-year-old, then maybe they'll be okay.
Conversations with Actors is produced by me, Vivian Kerr. You can find out more about our guests at conversationswithactors.com. Please rate us in iTunes if you have a moment and hit subscribe. You can reach me at conversationswithactors@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments. Thank you very much for listening.